Thank you very much for inviting me to be here today and provide a utility perspective on the proposed rule and some of the implications that we see moving forward as we work with our state commissions and our state regulators to develop workable plans that comply with the rule. I'm going to touch on a lot of the topics that Chairman Honorable and that Jennifer touched on, but from a little bit of a different perspective, and maybe get a little bit more into the weeds as to actually, what concerns we have moving forward in terms of maintaining the reliability of the system. As Chairman Honorable mentioned, affordability and reliability are the two major components, and what I really want to focus on today is the reliability component of that equation. So just to give you a little perspective as to who I represent, I work for the Edison Electric Institute. We are the trade organization for all of the investor-owned utilities in the United States. We are a consensus-based organization, and so we work with our members to try to find areas on which we can agree and move forward with those consensus positions. Our members serve about 70% of all the retail customers in the United States. And so what I'd like to kind of talk to you about today is, one, provide a high-level overview of our initial perspectives on the rule and how we are going to be moving forward with proposing changes and identifying concerns. And then to drill down a little bit more on the reliability component and some of the market challenges which we would like everyone to be aware of as they try to determine how to develop their state plans to comply with the rules. And finally, to talk briefly about some of the regional efforts that are already underway to discuss some of these challenges. So as Jennifer mentioned, there are 4 building blocks that the EPA has proposed that states use in developing their plans. And the impacts of these rules will vary by region. But there are some questions about these building blocks. EPA used a system approach to determining the goals, but it's unclear as to whether these building blocks can actually work together or can all be used at the same time. The state goals are different in terms of their levels of aggressiveness, and the guidelines don't take into consideration some of the work that's already been done by the electric utility sector in reducing carbon emissions. And there's inconsistent treatment of zero-emitting resources, and there's also questions, as has been mentioned, about the EPA's legal authority, especially when it comes to federal-state jurisdictional issues. But the potential impacts that we see coming from this rule is that there's going to continue to be a shift from baseload coal plants to natural gas and renewable generation. The EPA indicates that they anticipate about 46 to 49 gigawatts of the existing coal-fired generation plants will retire as a result of this proposed rule. This is in addition to the approximately 70 to 80 gigawatts of coal plant generation that's already announced that they're going to retire in response to some of the other EPA rules, specifically the MATS rule that's already been proposed. And most of these retirements are expected to take place by 2020. And this amount encompasses about 20% of all the coal plants that were in operation in 2010. And so there is going to continue to be a huge shift. And one of the things that I want to drill down on is how is the market going to adjust to try to accommodate the shift in generation from coal to natural gas. And as Jennifer mentioned, there is significant regional disparity among our membership and among how they use generation, what types of fuel sources they use, what types of state renewable requirements and other requirements that they have, and what their market structures are. So going forward, we're currently working with our members to identify key issues in the rule on which we can have some consensus about concerns, and then start doing outreach to key stakeholders at the EPA and at the states to try to develop alternatives that will save companies money and compliance costs, which would then relate to savings for retail customers in their utility bills. So as I indicated, I want to talk a little bit now about reliability. And that's really going to be the focus of my presentation, is maintaining reliability during this transition period where we're changing the fuel mix in the United States from one that's been focused on coal in some regions to more of a natural gas and renewables focused generation mix for electricity. And so our primary goal as electric utilities is to maintain the system reliability, which we define as the system's ability to deliver electricity to customers and to recover from any disruptions that may occur. Now, that sounds pretty simple, except that electricity can't really be stored in large quantities, and we're constantly having to manage supply and demand. So any energy that's taken out of the system has to always be managed by the energy that's being placed into the system. And the responsibility of doing that goes to the system operator. And who the system operator is varies according to where you are in the United States. Historically, utilities have been vertically integrated, with generation, transmission, and distribution owned by the utility. That utility planned for their peak load, and they received a reasonable rate of return from their state utility commissions for those infrastructures. In about the 1990s, in response to the Energy Policy Act of 1992, there was a move towards deregulating the industry in some areas of the country. And in many of these states, they divested their generation, they moved their operational control of their transmission facilities to regional transmission organizations, which then became the system operators. And while they still received a regulated rate of return for their transmission and distribution facilities, the markets determined what was paid for the generation costs. And it's in these areas that there's concerns going forward as to how these retiring coal plants are going to be replaced and whether they'll be replaced in a timely manner to maintain system reliability. So how do the RTOs and ISOs actually do this? Well, they don't own any facilities. They don't own any generation or transmission. They're still responsible for managing the reliability of the grid. And they operate markets to try to have generators recover the costs that in vertically integrated states they recover through their state commissions. And these are capacity markets, energy markets, and ancillary services markets. And ancillary services are essentially the load-following type services that are provided by generation facilities, so that there's reserves, that there's minute-by-minute generation available to try to meet the fluctuations that occur from load on a minute-by-minute basis. And traditionally, these ancillary services have been provided by baseload generation, such as coal, nuclear, and natural gas. Renewables do not provide ancillary services, but they require a significant amount of ancillary services due to their variable nature. And so the way that the RTOs dispatch generation so that reliability is met but costs are still kept down is that they use the least cost dispatch mechanism, in which generators bid in their costs. The least cost units are dispatched first, and then all the generators receive the cost of the last unit that's dispatched that day. So this is just a map of the RTOs and ISOs that are currently in operation in the United States. They serve about 2/3 of the retail customers in the country are served by generators that operate in organized and competitive wholesale markets. So just to give a little bit more of a pictorial depiction of what I was talking about as to how the supply curve works, least cost resources are at the lower end, and the resources keep getting stacked, and this is how the supply curve works. And then there's another curve called the demand curve, which is what the energy that they forecast that customers are going to be using. And that curve is overlaid on this supply curve, and that intersection point is the last unit that's used to supply energy for the next day. And so traditionally, this lower end has been filled in by coal and nuclear units and hydro units. And then as you move up the supply stack, it's usually been wind and natural gas. And the highest point, the peaking plants, the ones that are used very rarely to meet the highest anticipated peak load that might occur 1 or 2 days in the summer or 1 or 2 days in the winter, that's usually been served by the natural gas facilities because their ability to shut on and off or ramp up and down very quickly. And so this kind of depicts on a pictorial level what I just described as to how the resources are, have traditionally been stacked up. But now with the change in the fuel mix and the 70 megawatts of coal plants that have already announced retirement and further retirements being expected in relation to 111D, the manner in which the supply stack has traditionally worked is going to change. And this is going to affect different regions of the country differently, as Jennifer mentioned. And most of these retirements are currently occurring in the PJM area, which is the Mid-Atlantic, the SPP area, and the MISO region. But the fuel mix has gradually been changing over time. This isn't just something that's been happening in reaction to the EPA rules. The EPA rules are a large component of the change, but they are not the only component. The state RPS standards, or renewable portfolio standards, have made a lot of these, have driven a lot of these changes, as has low natural gas prices due to the shale gas. So as you can see from this chart, there's been a gradual decrease since the 1990s from moving from coal to natural gas in the national fuel mix. In 2000, coal comprised approximately 50% of the national fuel mix, and in 2013, it's anticipated it's going to be on around 38 or 39%. And so there's a lot of these changes taking place, and these changes are going to continue to accelerate. But one of the things that a lot of these RTOs and areas where they're expecting a large amount of sudden retirements between now and 2020, with a large number of them occurring within the 2016 timeframe, is making sure that there's sufficient infrastructure in place to maintain reliability when all this generation goes offline. And so just to give you an idea, infrastructure takes a long time to build. A transmission line to take generation from one point to another point takes about 10 to 15 years to build. A nuclear facility takes about 5 to 7 years to build, and that doesn't include the time for planning, licensing, and trying to site the facility. Pipelines take about, natural gas pipelines take about 12 to 18 months to build after all the regulatory processes are done and the siting is done and all the state environmental regulations have been met with. And currently, if a pipeline submits an application to FERC for regulatory approval, it's taking about 15 months to get that approval. And then a natural gas plant takes about 3 years in actual construction time. And again, this doesn't count the planning and the siting and all of the state requirements. And so there's a significant amount of lead time that's involved in building the infrastructure needed to maintain reliability when these coal plants go offline. So when utilities think about how they're going to invest in infrastructure, these are essentially some of the drivers that they take into consideration today. Obviously, the environmental regulations that we've been talking about, the cost of the commodity itself, especially in competitive wholesale markets where they need, if they don't get selected to participate in the market, they don't recover their costs for that day. The declining cost of technology, the goal to always have diversity in the fuel mix, state renewable standards, financial incentives for some generation types over others, and then, of course, customer demand. What are they asking for? What do the customers want? So this is just another depiction of the slide that Jennifer showed you earlier, showing that there's significant differences in fuel mix within the region. And there's a number of reasons for this. It's traditional infrastructure, ability to have pipelines built, ability to store natural gas, and also whatever the state goals are. And so we show you this map because one of the reasons that it's important to work on a regional level is because the needs of every region are going to be significantly different as they move towards complying with 111D based on what their starting point was in terms of their traditional fuel mix. So just taking a look at where we're moving in terms of capacity additions. As you can see to date, most of the capacity additions that have been put, or the generation that's been built, is natural gas and renewables. And going forward, what's planned to be built, that doesn't mean it will be built, it's just the ones that have entered the queue to build, is going to be natural gas and renewables. And this renewables curve includes wind, solar, hydro, and biomass. But the majority of the new generation coming online will be solar and wind. So what are some of the challenges that the industry has with integrating all this natural gas and renewables that's coming online? Well, first, there's a number of infrastructure challenges. Additional pipeline capacity is going to be needed in some parts of the country. There's been a lot of discussion, for example, about the New England area, where there's a great need to have pipeline capacity being built. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the way costs are recovered in these competitive markets, and New England is one of those markets, is different from how they're done in vertically integrated states. And so if you don't get selected to run in the market, you don't recover any of your costs. And so it's an economic decision. And if you don't run enough and you don't recover your going forward costs enough, then ultimately you'll make the decision to retire, because the signal that the market is sending you is that your plant is not needed to maintain reliability in the system to serve load. And so one of the challenges that some of these RTOs are dealing with is that there's no mechanism right now in the current market rules to allow them to finance and build pipeline capacity. Pipelines are built, they're long-term contracts, usually 10 to 15 years in length. And the way a pipeline is built could be compared to how an apartment building is built if they want to get 100% occupancy before they start building that apartment building. Well, that's how a pipeline is. They want to have all their contracts in place before they go forth and try to build that pipeline. So that means that a generator is committing themselves to a 15-year contract when they don't know if they're going to be running the next day and are going to be able to recover the costs of that contract. And so that's one of the challenges that's currently being faced in the competitive markets, especially in New England, to try to get the pipeline capacity built that's needed. There's also a number of operational challenges. The electric and gas industry have grown up very, very differently. The electric industry is a minute-by-minute, hour-by-hour industry that varies by region, and every area of the country kind of operates within their own time frame. The natural gas industry is a national industry. They operate on a national day, and things occur on a 24-hour basis, not an hour-by-hour basis. So there's a lot of communication and other challenges that need to be met as regions look into whether pipelines are able to give them the flexibility that they need to meet these sudden spikes in demand that an electric generator has. There's also concerns that if natural gas is used to replace baseload generation that's currently been served by coal and nuclear, will they still be available to ramp up and down really fast to fill in for variable resources when they're not able to operate? And so that's another, as demand for natural gas increases due to their increased use in the fuel mix, how is that going to affect prices going forward? And so these are just some of the challenges that we see with integrating nuclear, natural gas, and renewables. Oops, I'm sorry. And so this slide just gives you a perspective of kind of where, a very high-level perspective of where the gas currently is and where the pipelines currently are. And as you can see, there are not a lot of pipelines going out from where the new shale plays are. And so those are the areas that pipes are going to need to be built. Also, a lot of these existing pipelines are going to be flow changes. And so natural gas is going to start flowing in opposite directions than there's currently flowing. And so these are all changes that we're going to have to deal with going forward. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the regional efforts that are taking place to try to address this changing fuel mix to natural gas and renewables and to maintain reliability going forward. Well, all of the RTOs and ISOs have stakeholder efforts in place to try to identify the issues in their particular region and to identify what solutions that they need. And they've also done a number of studies just RTO specific. And then there's also a lot of regional activity that's going place. And so the Eastern Interconnection Planning Collaborative is taking money from the Department of Energy to do a study for the entire Eastern Interconnection to try to gauge, where the system currently is, what pipeline capacity is going to be needed, is there going to be enough flexibility on those pipelines, what types of contingencies can occur on the gas pipeline system that might cause a blackout on the electric system or vice versa. And the EISPC, which is the state commission equivalent, is also conducting a similar study funded by the Department of Energy. There's also studies going on in the non-competitive markets, such as in the West. The Western Governors Task Force just released, and that should actually be their Phase 2 report at the end of July, which was looking at similar things. The Desert Southwest pipeline stakeholders have been very active on this, trying to coordinate with the gas industry because they have a lot of renewables that they need to accommodate, but they don't have any storage for the gas, and so they're having a lot of issues. And so there's a lot of regional efforts going across all over the country. And there's also a lot of activity going on at the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. They're looking at communication protocols, they're looking at scheduling practices, how to compensate for ancillary services so that they're available to meet these hourly fluctuations, and how the capacity markets are really working in order to incentivize necessary generation. And even in areas that haven't traditionally had RTOs are moving towards, in some parts, trying to create some energy imbalance markets to share resources, to try to accommodate this increased use of variable resources and to make sure they have enough reserves to back these up. And so just in conclusion, I would just say that going forward, in developing these 111D plans, it's very important to be aware of the challenges. How does the system actually operate? What does it look like? How long does it take to build infrastructure in your state? What is your traditional fuel mix? And what challenges do your state commissions and your utilities see as they move forward trying to maintain reliability in this time of changing generation use? And also there's a lot of existing regional efforts that going forward that have a lot of wonderful information. And so it's important to take on what we already have and try to build from there as we move forward to comply with this new rule. So thank you for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion.